Hello, welcome to episode number 14 of The Outside Fence. I'm your host, as always, Tristan Heffernan. With me, as always, is my Melbourne racing expert, Stewart Balls Brown. Balls, great days racing at Caulfield on Saturday. Any joy on the punt?
No, I found the going a bit tough on Saturday, so it was a losing day for me, but not a massive amount of damage done. But we'll look to next week to hope to rectify that.
No good. The going was tough for you, but the going at Caulfield was superb. We upgraded to a good 3. Looked to race really well too. Yeah,
it did. We're coming a bit of a broken record here each week. Kudos to the Melbourne track managers. The track played excellent once again. There was no real bias noticeable. The biggest factor probably going into the meeting was once again there was a bit of wind around with a strong northerly forecast. Now, it never really eventuated to any great heights, I suppose. There was sort of gusts throughout the day that were sort of in that 30, 40 kilometre an hour mark, but the wind was sort of fairly low, I suppose, for most of the day. So it didn't appear to have too much of an issue with racing. Perhaps maybe it did make havoc with a few tempos in races, as a lot of the races did have quite slow tempos, so maybe that sort of factored into that a bit.
There were a couple of messy races. Probably the main messy race on the day was the Rupert Clarke, which we're going to dive straight into. Group 1 in name. Was this Group 1 in nature? I'm not so sure.
Yeah, it was, as you mentioned, quite a messy race. Sort of overall, they have gone at a fairly even speed here, but you'll notice when we get to sort of, I suppose, into the straight that there's a fair few hard luck stories there. But just sort of picking out a few key runners here, we've got the eventual second place getter, I suppose, Dollar for Dollar, who's going to the lead right now. Behemoth, who is the winner, is sort of in the middle of the pack there in the sort of black colours with the sort of gold type sleeves. Now, a horse of note we can talk about at the start of the race is Be Good to Your Mother. It's the horse who's currently in about third position now in those bright green colours. It was the expected leader in the race, or certainly was for me. But yeah, they didn't really show too much intention early in the race to find the front. Was quite happy sort of taking a sit, so that sort of dragged, I suppose, a fair bit of the speed out of the race. And as I mentioned, they only sort of went at a bit of an even speed and much less of a tempo than I assumed.
All right, I might let it run a bit further now and to see, as we let it go, there's a horse, Tagaloa, was caught 3 wide. There's a few horses that were probably pretty disadvantaged by this map as we let them sort them out. First of all, let's stop it here because I like this head-on view here. Maybe keep an eye on horses you thought were disadvantaged in running that we can give them an excuse for straight away.
Yeah, well, Tagaloa was obviously one. It was caught sort of, as you see, Streets of Avalon's about to go outside the leader there, and Tagaloa's that horse behind it that's 3 deep at the moment. It's about to be 3 wide with no cover. I suppose in the run, it was probably the only horse that sort of stood out as being sort of particularly disadvantaged. But as you'll see, you've got Cascadian, who we've spoken about previously, who's back on the fence there in the Godolphin blue colours. Then the horse behind, directly behind it, Superstorm in those pink and white Peters colours. Their horses definitely to keep an eye out for as we get into the straight, and both those horses particularly have hard luck stories.
All right, let's run. Let's talk about Behemoth for starters. As you see when we get into the straight, he takes a while to get clear running, but when he's out, he picks them up pretty easily. Now, I think he's got plenty on this field. Is that a fair call?
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. He obviously was carrying 60 kilos in the race under the handicap conditions, and that was, I suppose, potentially going to be the great leveller, as he did look the class horse going into this race. Williams got him into a great spot midfield, just behind that sort of leading bunch, and then sort of found a bit of trouble as we approached the turn here, and needed a bit of luck getting out. But yeah, once he got out, after sort of getting out and taking a few strides, he did look the winner, and he finished off in the 10th fastest last 200 of the meeting.
Yeah, we see here that he's just losing his momentum a little bit as he switches off heels, but when he's in the clear, he just makes him look second rate. Now, I have a bit of a query on the rest of this form. We'll just pause it here because there's a couple of hard luck stories that you can make a bit of a case for, that you can just forget the run. That's not showmanship, it's Superstorm. He obviously didn't get clear running at them, and Cascadians there back on the inside in the blue. They were the two that stood out to my eye, but just the way Behemoth was able to put them away really casts a bit of doubt over the strength of this form for mine.
Yeah, it does for me as well, particularly, as you say, there's plenty of hard luck stories there. Behind Behemoth there, you can see it's very much a bunch finish. So there's a lot of horses within, say, 2 or 3 lengths of the winner, and even horses like Mandela Effect and Reykjavik, who were sort of big odds in the market, they had genuine hard luck stories as well.
Okay, obviously the bunch field is rarely a good pointer for the strength of the form. Dollar for Dollars run second there. A really good run at his price, but you can argue he's had a beautiful run in front and had every possible chance, so it's hard to take too much away from that run for me. So I'm just going to let it run again through. Let's talk about Banquo, because this is a horse who was really highly touted. It was the 4-year-old down on the minimum. Seemed to have every chance to my eye. What did you make of his run?
Yeah, I'd tend to agree with that. He, along with the winner, he was a horse I had something on purely because, as you say, he profiled well for the race. He looked to map well as well, which turned out to be a fact. He got into a great spot there, pretty much following Tagaloa into the race, and it's hard to make an excuse for him. There's some question on him at 1400 now, based off this run, and he has run well in sort of a new market handicap at 1200, and he obviously ran well last week at 1200 metres as well. So maybe at this level he's better suited back to 1200 metres, and say if he goes to 1400 metres at lesser grade, that could be more suitable for him.
Okay, let's talk quickly about this horse peeling off Streets of Avalon here, Age of Chivalry. Now, he was a really strong performer at 1400, definitely last season. He doesn't seem to have come up this season to me.
No, he did have every chance there on Saturday. He sort of loomed here as a potential winner or even place getter, and he didn't quite finish off as you would hope. It's sort of back to the drawing board for him a bit. I think he's sort of finished in that clump with the rest of them. So maybe they'll look to go down in class again with him, sort of around that 1400 metre distance range. But it's sort of jury's out for him a bit as far as I'm concerned.
Okay, speaking of jury out, Tagaloa. Now this has had a tough run. I'm just starting to worry about Tagaloa, that he doesn't have the turn of foot to compete at the very top level. I've also got a little bit of a query on this 3-year-old form now out of his first up run where Immortal Love failed subsequently. And am I being too harsh on Tagaloa here considering he sat wide, or is there maybe alarm bells starting to ring a little bit?
I think you can definitely make genuine excuses for his run, and as you can see there, he hasn't been beaten far, so I wouldn't say he's gone poorly, but I do tend to agree. He sort of lacks that killer punch a bit. He's always off the bit and ridden along a sort of a fair way out from home, so it's sort of hard for him he doesn't travel into a race great. I assume he'll go straight into the Guineas off this run, but personally, even going up to a mile, which may suit, I'd find it very hard to back him into Caulfield Guineas off what he's shown in his first 2 runs back.
Can that be his saving grace, going up in trip and maybe racing a bit closer to the speed and a slower tempo, helping him travel a bit better?
Yeah, possibly. It's probably as you say, the sort of the great white hope for him that he's looking for that further distance. But it's still just a tiny bit of a worry for me when a horse sort of is continually off the bit and hard ridden a long way out, even though they might be looking for more distance. It's not a thing I really like to see with a horse, particularly they're racing sort of around a distance that looks suitable to them.
Yeah, I tend to agree. Now, we've mentioned Cascadian and Superstorm having no luck there near the insides. That's just sort of what we have to put up with these horses, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, particularly with Cascadian, who we've highlighted on the show before, who he's not the greatest horse out of the barriers. He always tends to settle back and does need luck as well. So, I assume he'll go to a Toorak handicap and then maybe on to Flemington for the Cantala Mile as well. So, like, he's going to be competitive in those sort of races, but once again, he'll be settling back in those races. He'll need the luck to come, the right tempo of the race to be there for him, and then he'd be a chance in the race. But as far as being a betting proposition, he's sort of not a horse. If he's in the market, you probably want to back. He's sort of also, if he's sort of outside the market, a bit forgotten by the punters, you can probably throw something on.
That's the time we want to get into them, is when everyone's sort of given up, and they're still going well. There's no knock on how they're going. They just need a lot to go their way. Before we move on from this race, any eye catchers there that we haven't mentioned?
Not really. I will mention Superstorm, obviously. He ran well enough first up over 1,100 the other week, but this is much more suitable at 1,400, and as mentioned, had no luck at all. So he's a horse out of this race that I'd be quite happy to follow as he gets to, say, a mile and even possibly the 2,000 metres. He's got plenty of scope, and as we saw last preparation when he was in Melbourne, he ran well in the Australian Guineas and also well in the All-Star Mile. So he can definitely perform well once he gets up to a mile and even further. So if he goes to, say, a Toorak handicap, he'd be a horse that I'd be looking to find.
Okay. The last one, that was Reykjavik there in the white and light blue charging to the line. That is he going to follow this same path, you reckon? He went around big odds there on Saturday, $41 SP, but he really steamed to the line.
Yeah, I'd assume he'd go to a Toorak as well. Many of these probably will. And look, he's a well-exposed horse, so it's sort of him running that close up in a Group 1 was a bit of a surprise. Obviously, as you mentioned, his SP was $41. So obviously that makes you a bit wary of the form as well. But yeah, I suppose if a similar sort of field turned up in a Toorak, there's no reason he couldn't be somewhere thereabouts again. But as I'd say, I think a horse like Superstorm would have a lot more scope than Reykjavik and would turn the tables on it up to a mile.
Okay, beautiful. Sounds like we're taking Behemoth and Superstorm out of this. Fair call?
Yeah, fair call. As mentioned with Behemoth as well, his next start's probably a bit unknown at this stage. I think they're looking to field, hoping a few offers come from Everest slot holders. But I'm not sure if he'd go to a mile of the Toorak, like he's starting to get weighted out of these handicaps now, being a multiple Group 1 winner. But, yeah, not sure where he'll go next.
That's a good point. If he did get a slot in the Everest, would he hold any interest for you?
Probably not as a winning chance, but I've got no doubt he'd run well and probably could run sort of top 4 or 5, particularly if they overdid it up front.
Okay, beautiful. We'll leave it there for the Rupert Clarke Stakes. Let's look at the MRC Foundation Cup. Now, this was won by a horse that you identified for us last time. In Orderofthegarter for those famous Lloyd Williams colours. He started favourite and did have every chance. Let's pause it when they settle down a little bit here. We'll just talk about the map and maybe who was advantaged and who was disadvantaged.
Yep, so obviously as they settle down here, going into the race, I didn't sort of think there was huge speed on paper. There was sort of no clear-cut leader to my eye. Obviously, there was a few sort of go-forward horses drawn wide, which sort of made me think they'd go along at least a speed that would, I suppose, give every horse a chance. They've ended up going along at quite a genuine speed here. The horse to look out for that makes the pace is In Good Health, which is out wide on the track at the moment, that yellow cap, in the sort of green colours with the nose roll on from the Peter Moody stable. It goes forward. Orderofthegarter, as pointed out, it finds a lovely spot in trotting terms, 1 out, 1 back. And then a horse like De Beer, who's sort of, I suppose, got its nose in front at the moment on the fence there. It's another one that sort of settles on speed. But, yeah, Orderofthegarter, I suppose, is the main horse to look out for. And then there's a few closers from out the back that we'll speak about a bit later.
Okay, let's let it roll. Let's talk about the winner Orderofthegarter, because this is our new Caulfield Cup favourite or close enough to it. I'm not convinced he's beaten much here. Is that a fair comment to make?
No, I think most of the horses you've beaten probably want sort of 2,400 or around that distance. The other thing, he's had sort of best run in the world here, finding a lovely spot, nice tempo for him as well, beautiful ride by Damien Oliver. So He's had every possible chance there. The thing he's got going for him as he heads towards the Caulfield Cup would be that he gets him with no weight. Initially, he had 50.5 kilos. He got a kilo penalty for winning this, so 51.5 kilos. He's a horse that can race on the speed. He's obviously from a good stable. Danny O'Brien, he sort of knows how to win these cup races. So he's got those sort of things going for him. Does he have the class to win a Caulfield Cup? That's what I'm not sure about. And also, I still would want to see him tick that 2,400 metre box. As we've noticed in a couple of the runs we've watched him, he still gets a little bit keen in the run, which obviously won't help him to get that 2,400. But as you mentioned, he's currently favourite for the Caulfield Cup, and I'd say that's purely because he's in the race now and in with a lightweight. I'd say come race day, I'd be very surprised if he did start favourite. But if a few things go his way on the day, there's no reason why he can't be in the finish.
Okay, yeah, he's gonna attract a lot of people with that lightweight. He did get a 1 kilo penalty for this win, but he's still in. He's really well treated at the weights. I've paused it here because I want to possibly identify a couple of horses to watch in the run home as we look for races over longer distances. Chapata is a horse that ran home into second. He's well back in the purple with the white stars. Anything else we should keep an eye on here, Balls, as they run to the line?
Yep, so Steel Prince is on the back of Orderofthegarter. It's in those sort of red and blue colours with the red cap. It's a bit obscured at the moment. Another sort of sneaky one, I suppose, is Gallic Chieftain, which is pretty much the last horse in screen at the moment in those OTI colours on the fence there. He's one to watch really late. And then I suppose a horse who didn't perform, who was well in the market and is a fairly high-profile horse, is Canaan from the Chris Waller stable. He's sort of about sixth last at the moment in those blue colours, 3 wide, trying to move into the race now.
Okay, cool. Let's talk about Steel Prince, because this is a horse who came through. Did it run in the Melbourne Cup last year? If it didn't, it was on the path through. It did. Yeah, is that aiming too high if they go around there again, or are we going to see maybe country cups or something for this horse?
I think he's going as well. Like he won the Andrew Ramsden last year, beating Surprise Baby to win his way into the Melbourne Cup. Now, he had a couple of runs to start his campaign through the spring, then ran into a couple of issues, and he had a bit of a stop-start preparation. He still ran a good race in the Melbourne Cup. He finished 9th, which obviously is a fairly good effort. Now, if he can get through this preparation sort of issue-free and get back to a Melbourne Cup, I assume he probably has to win a race to qualify for it again. But there's no reason he can't run well. Obviously, a race like the Melbourne Cup, you're sort of at the mercy of what international horses turn up on the day. It's sort of obviously hard for those Australian horses, but he's going every bit as well as he was last year. I think this year, particularly with his first 2 runs back.
Okay, what about Chapata? Because this horse came through the winter and sort of hit its straps. And now it's duking it out with some of the better stayers here early in the spring. Is there a race in Chapata this spring?
Yeah, well, it's an excellent return for him on Saturday. There was 77 days between runs. Obviously, well documented. He raced against a horse like Lord Belvedere through the winter and was fairly competitive with him. Now, he's the sort of horse, so I assume he's better suited. He does run well at 2,000 metres, but probably 2,400, 2,500 is his go these days. So he can head towards, say, Herbert Power or Bart Cummings to try and qualify for one of the cups. And based on this run, where he's in fact run the 8th fastest last 200 of the meeting, so he's got home very well, particularly for a race over 2,000 metres, he'd be a chance in Herbert Power or Bart Cummings for sure. Okay,
nice. Now, we do tend to get seduced by these horses that run home in strong late sectionals and whatever else. I really like the run of this Peter Moody horse with the nose roll on. That was in good health. She's not going to show up on any sectional data as finishing off the race well, but to do the work she did in the race and stick on to only be beaten a length and a half, I don't know where this form has come from, because it wasn't long ago she was winning in midweek company, but she seems to be going really well.
Yeah, she's absolutely flying this prep. As mentioned, they went at a genuine speed here, and she worked early from that wide gate to finally get to the front, and sort of didn't really get too many easy sectionals there. So to stick on and only be beaten sort of a bit over a length, that's an excellent performance. She's a horse, I'm not sure where she goes now, whether they have a crack at 2,400 with her or not. I suppose it'd be the right sort of time of the year to do it. They're sort of up and going and they know the horse is going well. But, if she dropped in grade or even stayed in similar grade around this 2,000 metre mark and look to get a sort of comfortable run on speed, then, she can definitely win again.
Right, cool. As we look there, that's Gallic Chieftain running on strongly. You said to point him out, he ran the fourth fastest last 200 of the meeting. He seems to be around forever, Gallic Chieftain, so I'm surprised that he would have such zing in his legs. He's going to go through the usual races as well, I suspect.
Yeah, well, both his runs back this prep have been excellent. Like his last 200 in both runs have been sort of quite high ranking 200s for at least the race. And as you mentioned on the weekend, he's run the fourth fastest last 200 of the meeting. Now, he's a horse who they always start off early in his prep without his blinkers on. Obviously, just getting him fit, some nice sort of prep runs. But once the blinkers go on this horse, it definitely means it's go time. The last couple of years, or last year at least, they've sent him up to Sydney for the Metropolitan. So it wouldn't shock me if they do that again with him, considering he's run well up there before. And the staying races in Sydney, sort of bar probably a horse like Mugatoo, aren't sort of the strongest races you'll find. So, it wouldn't shock me to see him pop up in the Metropolitan with the blinkers on. And if that's the case, then there's no reason he can't be competitive up there.
Yeah, definitely. He's definitely in the form to do something. Before we leave this race, let's talk about Canaan. It'd be a sore point if you were an owner with Canaan at the moment, because everyone knows they turned down massive amounts of money for this horse in the millions of dollars range. Can you make any excuse at all for this run?
No, I can't. Reportedly knocked back 2.7 million, so you'd hope they already have plenty, because you'd be feeling a little bit sick about that. But he settled well back as expected, and he was pretty much with Chapata on the turn. You can see the gap between them there. Chapata's put many lengths on him. So jury well and truly out for Canaan. And it's definitely back to the drawing board for a horse like him, who is such a highly touted as possible Cups horse coming to this preparation. He sort of failed to fire at 3 runs back.
Yeah, okay. Let's move on now to our third race for coverage. This is the Jim Maloney Stakes for the 3-year-old fillies. Now, this raises an interesting point, because we talked about a lot of these fillies coming through Moonee Valley. The winner Odeum, the second placed Aidensfield, and then they were coming up against a horse on a different path through the midweek meetings in Mozzie Monster. I'm going to pause it here, because I think there's a really strong key to this race in terms of the map, and I hope that you're going to point it out for us, Balls.
Yeah, well, they've only gone at a steady speed. Yes, Baby Yes, who's a horse who's got its nose in front at the moment, is the eventual leader. But if you look back in the field, that's where the main chances in the betting were stationed. So Aidensfield, who ended up starting favourites in sort of those brown colours in about sort of 6th or 7th spot. And just inside him is Mozzie Monster, who was second favourite, and then another horse who was right in the market, who was spoken about quite a bit on this show, is Agreeable in those red and white colours. So they've all sort of settled well back off the speed there. As mentioned, they've only gone at a steady speed here, so it's sort of advantaged those horses who are right on pace.
Okay, and speaking of horses right on pace being advantaged, the winner, Odeum, settled a bit closer here today in those blue and yellow colours. Now, you highlighted this horse from Moonee Valley as being quite unlucky. You didn't know whether it would have quite won the race, but it should have finished a lot closer, and it's come out here and it's won at $20. Was the key to this where it was settling? And is this a horse we can follow going forward, or was it just maybe a bit of a Christmas for it here?
It's definitely where it's settled in the run has definitely assisted its chances. It's obviously got a fair few lengths start on those main dangers back in the field. But personally, I think there's plenty of merit in the win. As we mentioned, it's run at Moonee Valley. It finished 5th in the race won by Night Raid that a fair few of these came out of. Now, whilst he did find trouble on the turn, she did find trouble on the turn. I don't think it cost her winning the race or anything like that, but it definitely cost her sort of 2 or 3 lengths, finishing 2 or 3 lengths closer. But she's shown here that she's sort of well up to these type of horses.
Okay, now Mozzie Monster. This is a hard horse to line up, coming off the different form. What did you make of her run?
Yeah, like it's definitely a pass. You can almost sort of group those three in the back of the field together a bit because they've all sort of followed each other home like that. They've all got to the outside of the track. And they sort of haven't really gained a massive amount of ground on each other. They're sort of all sort of finished off fairly well too. There's nothing sort of massively outstanding about their runs, I didn't think. But they've all sort of gone well enough that you wouldn't be sort of disappointed, say, if you're on them for, like, say, a race like the Thousand Guineas.
Yeah, I tend to agree. You see there, Aidensfield has run second, and it's beaten Mozzie Monster a length, who had its back, and Agreeable's about a length and a half behind her, and she sort of had their back there. So they've held their position to the line, much like at Moonee Valley, where Aidensfield ran home in front of Agreeable, and it was quite a similar outcome. Is this the right form for the Thousand Guineas, or do you think maybe that we should be looking somewhere different to maybe find who's going to win that race?
It's looking like a very open race at this stage. Now, coming up this week, we've got the Thousand Guineas Prelude at Caulfield, which is 1,400 metres. So once that race is run, I think we're going to have a much clearer picture on what the Thousand Guineas looks like. If this is to be the race that you sort of want to take the form out of, a horse like Agreeable, who we've mentioned plenty of times before, is definitely racing like it wants the mile now. As mentioned, they sort of all follow each other home, but it's run the third best last 200 of the meeting. It was quite strong through the line as well, so going up to a mile will definitely suit it. And even if maybe it can draw a bit better and settle a bit closer in the run, can sort of bring it to advantage. But as we mentioned, that race at Moonee Valley, that was won by Night Raid, who obviously beat a lot of these horses. So it'll go round in the Thousand Guineas Prelude on next Saturday. So we're going to get a great line on how it goes against, say, horses like Instant Celebrity, Anavisto, Dirty Thoughts, who's out of that Moonee Valley race as well. So personally, yeah, after Saturday's meeting, I reckon I'll be quite confident I can find the Thousand Guineas winner.
Excellent. I look forward to next show where you give us the Thousand Guineas winner balls. I know Agreeable's running on. I think I'd still prefer to be with Aidensfield, who's doing pretty similar. I think she might just be able to settle in front of the run again and hold her again. I think she's run really well there, Aidensfield, and she's my tip so far for the Thousand Guineas.
I'd say one advantage that Aidensfield's got, as you mentioned, she has shown previously she can take up a position, and plus she's only had 2 runs back, whereas Agreeable's had now 3 runs back. So I'd expect if there's any improvement to come in those horses, then it would definitely be with Aidensfield going into the Thousand Guineas third up.
Okay, beauty. Anything more? That seemed a pretty straightforward race to me, balls. Nothing more to come from there?
But like Silhouette, who's in the Godolphin blue there, sort of just inside Agreeable, she was slowly away and has got home well. Maybe she's the sort of horse probably on an Oaks path for Godolphin, so she's worth just sort of keeping in the back of the mind as the distances get a bit longer.
All right, excellent. We're going to leave Caulfield on that note. I was a little bit disappointed with the strength of the Caulfield meeting, actually. They were the three clear races of quality, but we'll mention this later. There's a massive weekend coming up this week, so that might have contributed a little bit to the strength of the fields. We've got plenty on the way. So we're going to duck up to Sydney now and have a quick look at the 2 main races in Sydney. Now, the first one is the George Main. We've talked about a number of these horses before when they came through their first up runs in the Wink Stakes. Very Elleegant was a beaten favourite here, getting back onto dry ground. I'm going to pause it here on the map balls. What did you make of where she settled, and do you think that contributed to her getting beaten?
I definitely think it didn't help. I think Well, personally, I thought she'd probably be a pair closer, either sitting sort of one out, one back, or behind Dreamforce, who's the leader there. So she sort of got into an awkward position. And as you'll see, sort of as the race gets a bit further on, she finds a bit of trouble sort of on the turn and early in the straight. I don't think it cost her winning or anything like that, but as we know, she's quite sort of a cantankerous type. She sort of needs a bit to go her way, so she probably wasn't sort of suited, sort of cluttered up there inside horses.
What did you make of her starting so short, getting back onto dry ground? We know she's dominant on heavy ground. Do you think that her spring revolves around the weather? Like if she strikes dry ground through the spring, is that going to almost put pay to her chances in these big races that she's targeting?
That's the sort of massive question, I suppose. We obviously know how good she is on wet ground and when there's a bit of juice in the track. So, you'd say there has to be some query if we do get firm going through the spring. It definitely would bring her back to the field. And as we mentioned with the first up run, sort of when she gets to Melbourne, which might be next start for the Turnbull Stakes, it'll be interesting to see how she goes because she's done all this. She's raced so well in Sydney since she was moved to the Chris Waller stable. So she has to still come back down to Melbourne and prove that she can do it or bring her Sydney form to Melbourne. So, personally, I'd love to see a dry track Turnbull Stakes because then we're going to get sort of a lot of questions answered with Verry Elleegant. But if we did get a dry track Turnbull Stakes, I'd assume Verry Elleegant would be sort of close to the top of the market, if not favourite. I suppose it'd be a horse I'd just be steering away from. Not saying that she couldn't win, but at that sort of price, you'd want sort of a bit more certainty, I suppose, that she's got things in her favour.
Yeah, okay. Let's talk about the horses that finished ahead of her first. We'll go with Kolding. Now, you were pretty disappointed with his run first up, and somehow he's managed to sit outside the lead, which is not what I think of when I think of Kolding. I'm thinking of smothered up and swamping them. So this is quite a tough effort. Also, Imaging is there on his outside in those greeny, whitey, blacky colours, and then Star of the Seas is that one coming off their backs. Where do these horses go, and do you think we'll see any of them in Melbourne in the spring?
I'd assume all three of these horses would have their next run in the Epsom. It's a race that obviously Chris Waller loves to target. He trains all three horses. So, I'd assume they'd all end up there. I'd very much doubt we'd see Kolding in Melbourne. It seems like he hates the joint. Based on his form down there sort of through last preparation. So I very much doubt we'd see Kolding there. But say horses like Imaging and Star of the Seas, we could definitely see them in Melbourne in a race like the Cantala or the Toorak. I'm not sure whether that clashes with the Epsom or not. But, I'd expect them to come to Melbourne for sort of mile races or even possibly stretching themselves out 2,000 metres towards the end of the carnival.
Okay, I'll put you on the spot quickly. These horses go to the Epsom. Which one do you want to be with?
I'd want to be with Star of the Seas. I think it was quite unlucky in this race. I don't think it was really suited. Sort of third defence sometimes can be a good spot to be, but obviously you always need luck. I don't think the luck came for this horse, and it lost a bit of momentum and had to ease around the heels of those horses in front. And if you swap the runs with Imaging, I've got no doubt that Star of the Seas would have won that race. A horse like Kolding, obviously you've got to probably respect it's now back in form, but I'd assume it's going to get plenty of weight in an Epsom compared to a horse like Star of the Seas, who doesn't quite have the resume of a Kolding.
He was really good in that Wing States as well too, Star of the Seas, wasn't he? He can
he
go on all ground.
Yeah, and particularly if a bit of rain comes, he doesn't mind that as well. But he's shown, on Saturday, he's at least shown that he's okay on firm going as well.
Absolutely. Beautiful. Let's duck over to our last race for coverage here, and that is the shorts. Now, everyone's talking about Everest. Here's a horse that was featured in last year's Everest and feels like it's been spruiked forever for an Everest. This is Classique Legend. Going there this way, I imagine. Has it got a spot yet, Bowles? I haven't heard anything.
It does. I think I know the owners have a slot, so I'd assume if it doesn't have a slot, it will very soon. So,
All right. This was quite a messy race, actually, and especially considering where this was in the run, Classique Legend. So its performance to win here, I was quite taken with. As we run to the replay here, he's drifting back in the white and red colours. He's a grey horse, about fourth last there. I'll just pause it. I'll pause the 800 sign right in front of him. Any other runners in this race that you'd like to keep an eye on here, Balls, or we'll just let it run through?
Yeah, well, I suppose Bivouac's always a horse who's sort of creates plenty of interest when he goes round. He's in the Godolphin Blue just ahead of Classique Legend. And then there's the recent addition to the Joe Pride stable, Eduardo, who is quite impressive in Sydney so far. He's in third position at the moment in those yellow colours. And one last horse I'd probably point out who seemed to be quite unlucky in this race and seems to be a much improved horse. And his preparation is Dirty Work. He's in sort of the orange and purple colours just in front of Bivouac there. If you sort of watch for him at the top of the straight, he doesn't get much luck and has to go back to the inside, which probably on the day was the inferior ground.
Okay, well, cool, we'll run it. Let's talk Classique Legend and Everest. Hasn't quite measured up to the really top-class races yet so far, but is this the case of a horse that sometimes people will even start to forget about because they've had their chance and they haven't quite stepped up, but with another season under his belt, he's possibly a better horse again this time in?
He possibly could be. He was still only a fairly lightly raced horse. He hasn't been sort of raced a lot. And so he probably still does have some improvement in him. The way the sort of track played on Saturday probably suited sort of that sort of style sort of coming down the outside. So he had that in hand. But yeah, it was quite an impressive win considering he looked to be finding a bit of trouble at the top of the straight. And then, yeah, once he got to the outside, he really let rip.
Yeah, dominant win. What do we make of Bivouac? Because people were surprised that he's even racing at this time of year. It's so easy to retire these sprinters before they get into their 4-year-old season. He's as brilliant as he's been a little bit hard to catch in his last sort of 7 or 8 runs, to my eye. Is there any trick with Bivouac that I'm not aware of?
I think the key to Bivouac is that his best runs have been in slowly run races. So I think a lot of people would agree his best ever win was that Newmarket at Flemington, where they sort of dawdled down the straight a bit and there was a real sprint home, and he's got that electrifying turn of foot that obviously suits him to that situation. Now, the issue for Bivouac, if he wants to run in any of these sort of Group 1 sprints, he's probably going to be running into a horse like Nature Strip, who's not really going to dawdle along in front and make it sort of like a sprint home. So that's sort of his issue. He's run well there on the weekend. He was caught wide and sort of kept coming. So I don't think he's in the Everest yet, but obviously Godolphin have a slot, so there's half a chance he would get that. But he's probably not a horse. He's a bit of a high-profile horse, and he tends to always be sort of right at the pointy end of the market. I think he was favourite again on Saturday. So he's under the circumstances of sort of a soft tempo and him getting a nice little map. He's probably a backable horse, but outside of that, he's probably not a horse that I'd be looking for. Okay,
that's a really good point to make there, Balls. That's sometimes when you find these horses to be a bit hard to catch, there can often be a reason why they're performing in some races and not others. So really good point that you make there. You brought up Nature Strip when you're talking about tempo there. We got a question from Claire on Twitter. She said, from an Everest perspective, where do you have Nature Strip after his first up run and today's barrier mishap? Now, if you didn't see this, I don't know where you were today because it was everywhere, but Nature Strip was having a jump out / trial / whatever, and threw James McDonald at the start and just bolted by himself. They picked him up all clear, no worries there, but when you see something like that happen, Balls, how does that sort of affect your thinking with a big high-profile horse on their way to some big races?
Yeah, from a punting point of view, you'd obviously prefer not to see it, or not for it not to happen, because we saw, I suppose, with a horse like Chautauqua, once sort of funny things can happen at the gates, it can be a bit uncertain for the horse. So I know that the stewards have said that Nature Strip has to trial again to their satisfaction. So obviously all eyes is going to be on that. From memory, he's obviously had a few issues at the gates as far as jumping cleanly and sort of quickly. but nothing sort of as serious as what happened today. So, yeah, all eyes will be on his trial, which I assume would be in the next couple of weeks, to see what happens at the start. Should he get away cleanly, then, I'd say it'd be all systems go to the Everest. And, personally, I thought his first up run was good enough in comparison to sort of previous first up runs. So, I wouldn't have any issues with sort of making him top pick in a race like the Everest. Obviously, once we know the makeup of the field, it can be a bit clearer. But, at this stage, I'd have him as sort of the number one seed.
Yeah, now, since we've last spoke about Nature Strip, it looks like Anders won't be going to the Everest, although the fact that it's missing the Moir now on Friday night, maybe that throws those plans out. But Aquis have given their slot to Farnan, which was a big shock to us because we weren't real impressed with what we saw from Farnan in the run to the Rose, and now it's going to match Motor's Nature Strip in an Everest. Does that hold any worries for you with Nature Strip if Farnan's going to be in there and be a pest? Or maybe given all the talk around Hugh Bowman's suspension, do they ride Farnan a bit more conservatively when they got this big horse staring them in the lead?
I think you're spot on with your last point there. I'd be very surprised if next time... Well, first off, I don't think I wouldn't say it's completely certain we ever see Farnan again, even though it's got that Everest slot. It wouldn't shock me if he's retired or another issue pops up between now and then. But, if he did make an Everest and obviously Nature Strip was in the race, I'd be very confident that on Farnham they'd ride a bit more of a conservative race. There's obviously no future for it eyeballing Nature Strip. That's probably only going to end one way for both horses. But, I'd assume they'd just elect just to take a sit just off Nature Strip and then, try their best from there.
All right. There we go. Let's look at the week ahead because you've put smorgasbord on the run sheet here, Balls. Well done on spelling it for starters. We've got two big meetings in Melbourne. Obviously, we've got the Moir Stakes on Friday night at the Valley, and we're in the Underwood Stakes meeting on Saturday at Caulfield. No doubt you've been glued to Bomb. Is that your weather side of choice?
It can be, yeah. I'm trying to use some other sites other than Bomb because it can be not the most reliable. I wouldn't like to be getting racing tips off whoever does the weather.
Easiest job in the world being a weather presenter, because if you get it wrong, it's like, oh, well, who can predict the weather?
Exactly.
But what races are you especially keen to see this week?
Moonee Valley Friday night. Obviously, we've got a decent lineup of races here, but the two main races would be the two that I'm most keen on. Obviously, the Moir Stakes, which has been robbed of a bit of interest with Anders not going there anymore, obviously having an issue, but still should be a fairly good field with the flying WA horse Fabergino coming over for it, and then plenty of horses who ran in that 1,000-metre race won by Bella Vella. The other week at Moonee Valley will be lining up again, so that should be interesting. And then obviously the Stud Stakes over the mile for the 3-year-olds. So this is a very interesting race. Flying Award will be going around again, giving it a spin around Moonee Valley before a possible Cox Plate tilt. And then horses like Cherry Tortoni, Glenn Fittich is a chance to line up. And then Hollyfield, who has been doing most of its racing in Sydney and comes down to Melbourne off a last start win up there. They're probably the two races on Friday night that I'm most looking forward to.
That is a ripper, that Stud Stakes. We've got a bit of head-to-head action there with Flying Award and Glenn Fittich after our show a couple of weeks ago. Now, I do remember Seamus Award coming through a Stud Stakes, so no doubt the connections of thinking along similar lines there with Flying Award. Are you still happy to stick with him as your number one seed for the 3-year-olds at the moment?
At this stage, out of the Victorian 3-year-olds, I'd still have Flying Award as the one. Obviously, we've got the Sydney 3-year-olds with the Golden Rose this week to sort of throw into the mix as well, depending on who comes down and who doesn't. So once we get a bit of notification as far as who's coming down there and we get through the weekend's races, I'd say the Caulfield Guineas picture will be a lot clearer than it currently is.
Okay, one more on Moonee Valley Friday night. Mystic Journey's nominated for the Stock Stakes, 1,600 metres. What do you do with her?
Yeah, personally, obviously it's always pending what price she is, but you'd assume her profile would be thereabouts in the market. But yeah, personally, I'd just want to see her go around after sort of a couple of below par runs to start this preparation. She obviously went back home and now we'll be back over in Melbourne again. So I want to just have a look at her, and plus she'll run into a horse like Perfect Jewel, who is going around the Stock Stakes, and that looks a great race for her. Especially considering the weather forecast, where there's a bit of rain through the week, but then the sort of 8 to 15 mils forecast for Friday as well. So, I'd expect the track would at least have some juice in it.
Okay, that'll put paid to Mystic Journey's chances too, one would imagine. Let's look at Saturday quickly before we finish up. 1,000 Guineas Prelude is going to tell us a lot. We've spoken about that before. Underwood Stakes, I see they're betting 6-4 Russian Camelot. Coming up against the likes of Humidor, Harbour Views coming through that Fian Stakes, possibly Arcadia Queen back into the big leagues after her run in the Let's Elope. He's pretty easy to be with, Russian Camelot, isn't he?
Yeah, he is. I'm probably not one to take 6-4 in a futures market. Not that brave, but yeah, given final field and obviously if the map looks good for him and all that kind of thing, 6-4 seems a more than reasonable price for a horse like Russian Camelot.
Yeah, and finally there's the Caulfield Guineas Prelude on as well. That didn't really take me as much as the Stud Stakes. It seems a bit of an easier option to the Caulfield Guineas, just looking at the noms.
Yeah, I think with the Stud Stakes, I think there's a lot of connections now, particularly with this year where the Cox Plate is looking a bit open. They see that as a good trial run for the Cox Plate, so a lot of the better 3-year-olds can head that way. But the Guineas Prelude has a sort of horses like Asar and Camborne who have come through sort of lesser class races but have looked very impressive in winning. They'll head that way, and also a horse like Prague, and then the recent Flemington winner Crosshaven should be lining up there as well. So it's probably a weaker Guineas Prelude than usual. It'll be interesting to see how it all plays out.
All right, excellent. We look forward to that. Thanks as always for your time tonight, Balls, dropping all the goods as usual. Thank you to anyone who's still watching with us by the end of this show. That was quite a long one there. Please give us a like or a subscribe. We've seen a few subscribers come on YouTube in the last week. Thank you very much for that, and for all the questions and the love on Twitter. Much appreciated. Balls, good luck on the big double header this weekend, and I'll talk to you next Monday.
Thanks, F.